Hi, welcome to day number 4327 of the lockdown. Hi, this is Diana and this is my channel Dinky Loves Books. That's all about books and reading. If this is your first time here, I do hope you'll consider subscribing for all kinds of book related content. So today I'm going to be doing a review of Stephen King's latest book called If It Bleeds, which consists of 4 novellas, namely Mr.Harrigan's Phone, Life of Chuck, Rat and If It Bleeds. They are not all horror novellas, but they all do have some element of the paranormal in them and they're all quite different from each other. So the first story, Mr. Harrigan's Phone, is about this young boy named Craig who goes to visit an elderly gentleman called Mr. Harrigan, who's very wealthy and he lives alone. He doesn't have access to any technology. That's by choice because he just listens to his old-time radio and things like that. And 4 times a year he gives Craig scratch tickets, basically like a lottery ticket. You scratch it and you may or may not win some money. And one day Craig actually wins some money, and with the money he wins, part of it, he buys a phone, an iPhone, the very first iPhone. He buys it for Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Harrigan's never used a smartphone before and he's absolutely fascinated by all the capabilities that this phone has. He's a keen investor in the stock market, and when he realizes that he can get real-time information about the stocks that he has invested in, or he can make split-second decisions based on the information he can access on his smartphone, he becomes absolutely addicted to it. He's very fascinated by the fact that you can get information so immediately, but he's also very wary of it because he imagines how this can be misused in the hands of the wrong kinds of people. So Craig is quite attached to Mr. Harrigan and he looks forward to his daily visits where he reads to him, and one afternoon he finds that Mr. Harrigan has passed away. He's really quite devastated that he won't be able to speak to the old man anymore, so he buries his iPhone along with him in his casket. Some time passes and he's really missing Mr. Harrigan, and he calls him on his phone just to hear his recorded voice message, and he's surprised that the phone is still on after all this time. And then he keeps calling and then things start to happen, which is where I'll stop telling you anymore, because then that's just a spoiler and you need to read the book to know what happens next. So that's where I'll stop. The second novella in this is The Life of Chuck, and what can I say? I found this a really strange story. The story itself is not strange, it's the treatment of the story that's strange, because the entire story is written in reverse. So you start with Act 3 and then it goes to Act 2 and Act 1. It's about this man named Chuck or Charles, whose name starts appearing on billboards all around town and even on news channels, and people start wondering who is he and what is this about. And simultaneously the world is also coming to an end, and the story goes backwards from the time the world is ending to Chuck's childhood. And to understand this story you really need to pay close attention, because otherwise you may not be able to figure out what's going on. It's not told in a linear fashion. Like I said, it's told in a reverse way. It really did take me some time to kind of concentrate and figure out what was going on. Everybody is raving about the story Life of Chuck. I was wondering what is so great about this story that everybody's just going on and on about it, but I realized that it's not the story per se, it's the treatment of the story, it's the way it's been written. If you're just a reader, you'll be like, wow, I love this story, the way it's told. If you're a writer, you'll be like, wow, I love this story, the way it's written. Because technically it's so awesome. It's really difficult to maintain the integrity of a storyline backwards, and that is what is so fascinating about this story actually. The third story is If It Bleeds, and that's where the title of this book comes from. There's an old saying in news reporting, if it bleeds, it leads. And this is a story about a news reporter who is always showing up at places where there has been a disaster, and this has been going on for many years and many decades. And a private detective called Holly Gibney, she realizes this and she thinks there's something fishy about it, so she starts investigating who this person is and why he always seems to be wherever there's a disaster. So the latest disaster is a school bombing, and she examines the footage which shows the person who delivered a package to the school. She starts investigating that, and that leads her down a rabbit hole where then she realizes that there's a connection between all the previous disasters where this reporter used to show up. Now you may remember Holly Gibney Gibney from The Outsider and Mr. Mercedes. She's from that same universe that Stephen King has created, along with Ralph Anderson and Bill Hodges, who was her boss. In my opinion, there was no need for the reporter to be Holly Gibney, because it could have been anybody else and the story would have worked just as fine. There's a lot about Holly Gibney's personal life also that has been included in this novella, which I thought was unnecessary. There was nothing that it added to the story. Holly Gibney is a very beloved character of Stephen King, and I suppose that's why he brought her back to life. He keeps bringing her back in these stories. If you haven't read The Outsider, you may find it a bit difficult to relate to this story. So if you can, read The Outsider as well, and then you'll be able to relate to this much better. And if you can't read the book, at least try and watch the TV series The Outsider, which is, I think, on Hotstar. That'll give you a much better idea of what's going on in this novella. Personally, I don't share the love that Stephen King has for this character, Holly Gibney. Honestly, I think she's a bit irritating. I think that this story was just written so that it could be made into part 2 of a TV series, and I would watch it, quite honestly, because it is interesting, but I don't think it's the best story of this novella. I'll tell you which story I think is the best at the end of this review, so keep watching for that. The first story in this novella is called Rat, and it's about an author who wants to write a novel. He has written some short stories previously, and he has attempted to write a novel previously, and that didn't end very well for him because he had a mental breakdown which affected his family life and kind of affected his mental health to a great degree. But suddenly he's inspired again to write this novel, and he wants to go away to a cabin in the woods where he thinks he'll be able to do his best work. He then goes away to this cabin and he starts writing over there, and he's confronted by this rat who has then a great role to play in the completion and publication of his novel. If that sounds like an absurd premise for a novella, it is, but it somehow works when Stephen King does it, and I thought I would roll my eyes or end up laughing at it, but I really didn't. It was acceptable as a Stephen King story. On the question of whether I prefer Stephen King's longer works like his novels or his short stories, I am partial to his longer novels, because if you know about Stephen King's plots, they do take some time to develop and they get quite multi-layered and multi-dimensional. Even if you read these stories, you will realize that the actual plot picks up somewhere halfway through the story when it really starts to get interesting. Prior to that, it's all just kind of building up to what is yet to come. And so I think that the longer novel format is more suitable to that kind of build-up of story. And so I prefer his longer novels. Another reason why I love Stephen King is because his mind is so, let's just say, he contains multitudes. His work is so prolific. Nothing is really like anything else. There is all a Stephen King kind of vibe to his stories where you can identify them quite easily, but none of them are really like each other. Another thing I like about his writing is that he never uses shock as a plot element. It just creeps up on you very slowly till you start to feel it crawling on your skin. And he also lets the readers into what is going on behind the scenes. The reader always knows what's going on, even if the character doesn't know. So my favorite story in this whole book was Mr.Harrigan's Phone, because I thought it was a very sweet and endearing story. It was about the love that this boy has for the old man and vice versa. There was just a hint of the supernatural, but it's one of those stories which just has like a hint of something, and then you can kind of imagine what might happen. In fact, when the phone used to ring, I used to be thinking, oh God, please don't pick up. I thought, what if he picks up and answers? What's going to happen then? And imagining that was a scary thing for me. Life of Chuck was brilliant for the way it was crafted in a very technical sense, and I think it stands out as the best story of this novella because of that aspect and not for the story itself. If It Bleeds was okay, it was a good story in itself. It was a bit too long drawn out because of all the extra elements that were added into it, but I also also do think that you need to have some idea of the outsider universe to understand the full implication of this story. Rat was my least favorite story just because it had an element of absurdity. I mean, it was readable. I did want to know whether he was able to complete his novel and publish it, but apart from that, there was nothing really that drew me to that story or fascinated me in any way. So that was my review of Stephen King's If It Bleeds. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe, and also come back to my channel soon for more videos like this. I'll be back soon with another video. I'll see you then. Bye. If that sounds like an absurd premise for a novella, it is, but